Hey guys, welcome back to Supposedly Fun. I'm Greg. It's funny, it wasn't really ever my intention to do a lot of book haul videos, but I seem to have, for the second month in a row, accumulated a fair amount of new books and library books, so I figured I would do another one of them. I think BookTube might be bad for my wallet. We're gonna have to see how this goes. But let's start with the library books. The first one I got from the library is Lot, Stories by Bryan Washington. I saw this one on Instagram and was instantly curious. It's a collection of short stories about a kid with I believe it's a black mother and a Latino father. Yes. He is growing up in Houston and is realizing that he's gay. Since I haven't read it yet, I don't know how interlocked the stories are, or if they all really connect, but it just sounded really interesting. It paints a big portrait of Houston and growing up there and this kid's life, growing up gay in this environment. Sounded fascinating to me. Can't wait to get to that. The other book I got from the library was Lost Children Archived by Valeria Luiselli. I'm not going to talk about this one a whole lot because I feel like all of BookTube has been talking about it, but this is about a family on a road trip, and as they're driving, an immigration crisis is looming on the border. Seems very timely and interesting. It is a proper chunky book, but I can't wait to get to it. It sounds really interesting. While I was at the library, I noticed this. My library sells used books. I don't know if yours does as well. It's The Accidental Tourist by Ann Tyler, and it's a hardcover copy. If you remember from my video about Pulitzer Prize winners that I don't like, I have a kind of complicated relationship with Ann Tyler. I did not like Breathing Lessons at all. But I also mentioned in my Choose the Year book tag for the year 1982 that I was interested in reading Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant by her. This is another one that has intrigued me for whatever reason. It's about a man who does not like to travel, but writes a series of travel books. The series is called The Accidental Tourist, and the logo of that series is a comfy armchair with wings, so it's right there on the cover. But he finds himself adrift after his son dies and his wife leaves him, so it just sounded like a really interesting book, so when I saw it at the library, I had to grab a copy. Now, I mentioned the Choose the Year book tag video that I did, and in that I also mentioned this book, A Pale View of Hills by Kazuo Ishiguro, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature 2 years ago, I believe. I've read two of his books and I loved both, The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go, and as I was talking about this book, I was thinking, I gotta get myself a copy. So I did. I went out and I grabbed it. I also meant to get a copy of The Women of Brewster Place. They did not have it. It's on order. So there you go. And while I was at that bookstore, my favorite local indie, I noticed a book by Edmund White called City Boy. Now, also from the Choose the Year book tag, I mentioned Edmund White because he wrote the book, oh my god, what is it? A Boy's Own Story. Thank goodness it's there. So he wrote A Boy's Own Story. This is actually a memoir of his life in New York City in the 60s and 70s. I believe he was at Stonewall or in the vicinity, or at least he was in the city when it happened. It just sounds like a really interesting memoir. It's a really interesting time in New York, even outside of the LGBTQ angle, because New York City was not doing very well in the 1970s. So this one has been on my radar, maybe not as high as A Boy's Own Story, but I definitely want to get to it, so I had to grab myself a copy. Same bookstore trip, I noticed a book by Katherine Dunn called Attic. Katherine Dunn wrote Geek Love, which is a book that I love. I had never seen another book by her in a store. I wasn't even really sure she had written any other books. So I picked it up just on that. And it sounds really interesting. It is about Kay, who is part of a cult-like organization that sells magazine subscriptions. She gets picked up because she tries to write a bad check. She ends up in jail. And what follows is a kind of stream of consciousness depiction of her experience in prison. Sounded really fascinating. I did peek at some reviews on Goodreads before I actually bought it, and some people described it as a difficult book, but I'm just really curious about something else that she has written, and it's really not long at all. It is only about 134 pages, so even if it's difficult, I feel like shouldn't be too hard. I hope not. The reason I was in my favorite local bookstore was to pick up two books that I had ordered. The first one is Willa and Hesper by Amy Feltman, which has a very white cover, which doesn't do very well in this light, but it's also a very pretty cover. I do not remember where I heard about this book. I know it was on BookTube, but I cannot for the life of me remember who was talking about it. So I'm sorry, maybe I should start writing these things down. I know it was BookTube. I remember the book, don't remember who was talking about it. This is, of course, the story of Willa and Hesper. They have a relationship. It sounds like they kind of break up and go different ways, and they're dealing with different things about their lives. It just sounded really interesting to me. And one of my goals for the year is to read more LGBTQ books that focus on the L, the B, the T, and the Q. I got the G pretty well covered, and I have I love books in that genre. I just need to expand my horizons into the other letters of the community, and I think this will be a good way to help me do that. The other book I had on order is The Gallery by John Horne Burns. Now this takes me back to a book I DNF'd in March, which was Leading Men by Christopher Castellani. Interestingly, for a book I DNF'd, it influenced my reading a lot. I had purchased Plays by Tennessee Williams last month, and now I got this one because this sounds like a lost classic. When I was reading Leading Men, I wasn't even sure this was a real person. It is a real person, and this is a real kind of forgotten classic. It deals with World War II, but what particularly grabbed me is that it says it is one of the first novels to look directly at gay life in the military, and it was published in the 1940s or 1950s. So that immediately grabbed me. 1947. So that immediately grabbed my attention. I felt like I had to, and this is a beautiful edition from the New York Review of Books. There you go. The bookstore I love in town has a lot of books by the New York Review of Books. They did not actually have this one, so I had to order it, but I can't wait to get to it. And finally, we've been watching a lot of Queer Eye in this house lately, so of course I had to get Karamo's book. Judge me if you must, I don't care. I think it's really interesting. I love the show. I'm a big fan, and I enjoy watching it, so I'm curious to see what he has to say. Plus, I had a coupon at Barnes & Noble, so this was perfect. So, I don't know. Will I love it? I don't know. Will I enjoy it? I'm willing to bet I will. So, there you go. Those are the books that I have brought into my life in the last month. If you want to try to warn me away from any of these, please let me know. If you think I should prioritize any, let me know that as well. If there's anything new in your life that you are excited about, let me know that as well. And as always, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you are already subscribed, thank you. I appreciate your time. If not, I hope you enjoyed this enough to hit subscribe. And I will be back. Until then, happy reading.